Hello and welcome back to Advanced Professional Communications, COMM-6019. And here in week 7, we're going to take a look at managing group dynamics and within that group, collaborative writing. And these two things are important because in an interprofessional environment, you're often asked to work with other individuals within your department or with other departments. Regardless of where these people are coming from, the same kind of group dynamics should be considered, and the same sort of collaborative writing is going to be expected of you as a group. So the team is put together. You're looking at 3 different types of messages: informational, procedural, and interpersonal. So the first one, informational, has to do with the content, has to do with the problem or the question that you're going to look at. And from there, the data you're going to collect, and if necessary, possible solutions to the problem that you have been presented with, that is. The second one is a procedural, and this has to do with how the group will actually function. It will have to do with the methods and the processes by which the group will achieve the solving of the problem, or at least the collecting of data. And so where you are going to be looking at the procedure is in decision making: who will do what? Will you have a leader? Will everybody be equal among the 3 or 4 of you? When will the assignment be due? And what will you do in terms of a time frame? Those are all the procedures that will allow this document to be generated amongst and within the group. And the third one is the one that sometimes is not always the easiest, which is the interpersonal part. And this focuses on the students themselves, the people. And what you want to do for the most part is always promote friendliness, cooperation, at least a degree of loyalty to the team so that everyone really does the best that they can. Because remember that the amount of work that you put into it will of course matter, but you wish everyone else to do the same thing, because you don't want to be spending a ton of time working and really doing the best job you can and knowing that others are kind of not quite pulling their weight. So this is how you wish to be able to deal with it and be able to communicate to the other group members to make them understand that it is important to have a degree of loyalty to that group and be able to build up that trust that the group needs in order for individuals to trust one another that the work will be done. So you can do it in a different ways. The first one is orientation. The group sits down and simply sort of begins to talk and define the task at hand. We've picked a problem or a question to look at. We may have tentative solutions, but we need to define the task, right? We need to figure out exactly how we're going to go about solving this problem. So once that happens, you've oriented the group, then you want to start to form the group, and it's entirely up to you whether you wish to have a leader, and if there is a leader, if that leader will be assigning tasks to the remaining group. Now, that's not to say the leader does nothing. The leader may simply be someone that can coordinate others, right, and orient others towards their work. So formation and coordination really are 2 important aspects of a group and the group dynamic, because with coordination, you want to make sure that the work is going to get done, so that when someone is tasked with finishing something on time, that they actually do. And if there are any conflicts, if there is a leader, then the 1 or 2 individuals who are having the conflict can go and at least have it sorted out using the wisdom of the leader. The hope, of course, is there is no conflict, but that's a perfect world. And there will be conflicts of different types, depending on the amount of work, the amount of time, and so on, the difficulty of the problem. So all these things, orientation, formation, and coordination, are all about the group dynamics. And then the last one is formalization. And what happens here is individuals sit down and try to reach some kind of a consensus in its decision making, whether or not they're going to have a leader, whether or not they're going to trust each other to say, okay, when we meet next week, I will have this done, you will have that done, and we're going to be able to pool our resources. So all 4 of those, orientation, formation, coordination, and formalization, are all important towards the group dynamics, because every group has some version of that. Okay, as you are trying to develop trust, you do it through communication, through honesty, through openness, respect, of course, reliability. And if you can do that, if you're lucky to have all those things, You will have a somewhat trouble-free group. That's not always the case, but we certainly should aim high and hope that we can keep the reliability and respect and consistency and openness always open so people can speak to one another. So you want to be able to resolve issues and problems. You want to be able to communicate effectively, coordinate effectively as well. You want to make sure that the outcomes are not kind of, sort of half finished or, well, good enough, where you want quality outcomes. And in the business world, quality outcomes are primary. You don't want to lose your job over someone else's inefficiency or someone else's laziness. So if you can deal with it in a school setting and learn how to navigate through that kind of a problem, you're less likely to have that kind of an issue in a professional environment. I'm not saying you never will, but when you do, you can at least deal with it. So trust, honesty, and openness are very, very important. And if that's the case, and people feel that they can be listened to honestly and openly, you're more likely to resolve an issue kind of on a lower level than if the issue was left to fester for a couple of weeks and really becomes a serious problem, because now it's really derailed the group. So the more open and honest and respectful the group is, the more likely people are going to be able to air their grievances, right? And be able to get some kind of resolution over it. Okay, so the group has been put together. They're facing a task. They've got to deal with this problem, put together data and seek some kind of solution. So how do you do it, right? Each team member will do a range of different things. Or you could start by simply looking for information. And if you can pool your resources, it may be that certain people have either got some experience in this problem or have some sort of knowledge about that problem. So whatever knowledge gaps there may be, one person's knowledge gap may be another person's strength. So you always want to play on strengths, right? Not weaknesses, but on strengths that each person brings to that group. Giving information and opinion is always important, and making sure that those opinions and that information is heard in an honest, open, and reliable way so that those issues can be resolved. When you actually are going through the data, you can certainly learn to summarize and restate those major points and present those to the team and say, well, I've done my readings and I've read these 3 articles, and generally speaking, this is what they're about. So again, if it's done openly, respectfully, and honestly, the summaries can be either embraced and used, or they can be possibly sort of modified in some way so that some part of the article is going to be used. And again, it has to do with trusting people and remaining open and respectful, because people are doing the work. And if the work is done, but the material that is found may not be 100%, it may not be the ideal thing, you need to be able to tell that person in a respectful way that, thank you very much for your work, but we won't be able to use all of this. So you have to learn to kind of navigate around people's feelings, because you don't want to be hurtful and just, really brisk about it and say, no good. No, that's not the way it works, because you will have different problems. So when you summarize and evaluate the content, you want to bring people together, play on their strengths, and really build a group around each of the positive qualities that the individual brings to it. And if you can do that, you can coordinate all those strengths, you'll be able to plan the work and give directions more effectively. It will be more likely that the job is going to get done. That's really kind of the long and the short of it. You also want to make sure that people are encouraged to participate, that the channels of communication remain open and accepting. So you don't want, let's say, out of a group of 5, 2 people that seem to not say anything ever. And we're really not sure what they're thinking. Do they feel comfortable? Do they feel like they're in over their heads? Have they even done any work? So if you can encourage participation, even with a leader may delegate, a certain person to speak. What have you found? Can you give us a summary? That may be one of the ways around it. But make sure that everyone feels like they can participate. If you are working, you don't want to go too far and really burn people out. So you should learn to take certain breaks. It relieves tension. It takes the minds off people's work. They can do something else, some fun activity. It doesn't matter what. You might, for example, choose to meet in a coffee shop. which hopefully in a few months that might actually be a reality. So you can relieve tension that is perhaps part of the group because you're working hard, but you may make it fun by meeting somewhere else, somewhere you could maybe have dinner or something to eat or drink and still continue with the work. So that's a way to relieve tension. Checking feelings is always good because you want to make sure that you know how your members, each individual in the group, how they're feeling about their activities, how they're feeling about their work. Do they feel like they're being swamped with too much? Can they actually handle the workload? Because if you are in an academic environment, this is not the only course you're taking. You could be taking 3, 4, or 5 of the courses, and you want to make sure that you know that the group that you're working with is doing okay. Because remember, when all is said and done, that entire group together gets marked. It isn't just you. So you want to make sure that the group is working, is firing on all cylinders, and whatever metaphor you want to use, that it's always working to the best of its abilities. So participating, relieving tension, checking feelings, all these things are important. And again, what will often come up with a group will be interpersonal problems. Know how you can deal with these. And you could maybe sort of let it be made very clear to people that if there are interpersonal problems, we will work them out together. It will not be, let's say 4 members ganging up on one other one. That's not going to solve problems. It's going to alienate that one single person and likely drive them out of the group or not make them feel like they can or should even participate. So if you can do that and you conduct what are called listening activities, you are going to likely have an open and respectful form of communication amongst all of the group members, so that if things that are not related to the direct problem that the group is trying to solve, but in fact interpersonal problems, you can still do that. You can still resolve those issues because they are important. Okay, so once the group is started and it's functioning, and it seems to be really doing well, it's working well on its own, let's keep in mind that groups can sometimes go off the rails, we'll say, through a number of different problems. And these are sort of the negative aspects of group dynamics. And there's kind of 4 of them: blocking, dominating, clowning, or withdrawing. So to block means that you're disagreeing with the ideas that the group is proposing. And there could be a range of different reasons. You may think it's too much work, or that person just doesn't feel like researching. Maybe they don't even know how to research properly. So they're going to tend to block certain ideas that they feel are particularly difficult for them. Now, you will also get the possibility of someone that is going to try to dominate the group who may or may not be the leader. You may have chosen a leader, and yet there's someone else that seems to always wish to kind of control the narrative, control the conversation in some way. And they will do that by trying to either run the group or trying to shut down other people and their proposals, their ideas, their summaries, their evaluations. So if there is a leader, even if there is a leader, that leader should not be such a dominating force that they are actually shutting down people. If you have a leader in your group, that person should be there to coordinate the positive efforts that the group is putting forth. They shouldn't be dominating. They should be a person that you can go to help to resolve issues and crisis of one sort or another, but they shouldn't be a dominant force that really shuts down everybody else. Now, another way in which the dynamics of a group may fall to the wayside is kind of goofing off, right? Clowning around, being unproductive, whether they're unproductive jokes or they're distracting people, and they're the class clown, and nothing's getting done. People are entertained, but they're not getting a whole lot of work done. And of course, if that clown is now sort of banging heads with a leader, that's now more of a showdown and kind of a dominating forces that are at work against each other, and the group is not getting any work done. Now, the last one is kind of the opposite of dominating, which is to withdraw, right? To be completely silent, to not contribute, to not help, to not really say anything, to not, put any ideas on the table. You don't want that either. So a good group should be able to work within its perimeters, its dynamics, without having to worry about blocking, dominating, clowning, or withdrawing. Okay, so when you got your group functioning, right, your decisions should be based on the ability of each individual to gather relevant information. When you have that clear idea in mind, this is our problem, this is our main thesis, right? We're going to look at this, right? Problem X. So you want to be able to gather information. You want to be able to assess that information, the evidence that you gather. You want to weigh that evidence and say, well, some of these articles or some of these case studies are clearly more valuable than others. But unfortunately, you may not know that until after you've had a chance to read through them. Now, this is why I really stress when you're looking and you're just researching, always read the abstract, which appears at the top of a paper. Any kind of paper that is presented will always have an abstract or summary, not the introduction even, but just abstract/summary of the main points of the essay. And if you are trying to really be strategic when you're researching, always look at those. So when you're gathering information and you do find something that's good, it will be something actually worthwhile. So you're gathering information, you're assessing and weighing the evidence, and you're looking to see which article or which case studies are better than the others. And for sure, right, you should always be guided by, does this article have value to the overall problem that I'm looking at? Will it actually help us? And when you start doing that, and each person presents what they have found, the next step is to achieve a degree of consensus within the group that says, okay, we are going to focus on these 7 articles. Let's say it's a 10-page paper. It could be fairly detailed. The problem could be complicated. But what's happening here is consensus needs to be achieved for those 7 articles to be not only weighed and discussed, but chosen. So now you've whittled down, let's say each person may have been asked to read, let's say 5 essays over a couple of weeks. So you meet again and you say, okay, we've got 4 people in the group, that's 20 articles, but we need to whittle it down to 7, right? Because it is still let's say a 10-page paper. So that's where consensus really comes in. And it has to be done in an open and respectful way, right? You don't want to shut people down and dominate them, but allow people to present their work. The person presenting the work may themselves not think highly of a certain paper. They had to read through it. Maybe there wasn't an abstract. And they may say, you know what, out of these 5 that I was asked to read, I think these 2 are the best. Okay, consensus is much easier to achieve than someone presenting all 5 and saying, they're excellent, all 5 of them should be used. Well, maybe not necessarily. So consensus is something that needs to be sort of navigated through so that everybody feels like they have not only participated, but have been heard in a respectful and open kind of way. So if you're going to allow the majority view to prevail, right, you want to make sure that if that's the case, then everyone takes ownership, right? Everyone takes ownership of what's going on. Because what's happened here is you have people presenting ideas and then owning those ideas. Because with consensus comes the fact that the group participation is across the board. Everyone is part of it. Okay, so you want to do a series of things. You want to understand what the group has to deliver and when. Be aware of the length of the project, the time frame. That's always important. Identifying problems. Now, that's not only problems that are presented in looking into the main thesis, but also interpersonal problems, right? Time problems. Imagine if I were to ask you, let's say right now this year, with all of you living around the world, to actually get together once a week. I mean, that's going to be really difficult. Now, I'm not doing that simply because it is too difficult. We have enough problems already. But if that were the case, that would be a pretty serious problem, right? You'd have to figure out an ideal time where it's either really, really early where you are or really, really late where someone else is. Is there some sort of ideal time we can meet? So these are problems that will affect the gathering of information, but it's a problem that affects the group more so. Gather information critically, evaluate it as you go through. And so when you are doing this, if you have a clear idea in mind, if your main thesis is absolutely clear, then you can gather information critically because you know what you're looking for. Does this case study directly address my main thesis or not? If it doesn't, read on, go somewhere else. So you need to be able to gather that information critically and be able to collect the data that is most meaningful. So when you're establishing the criteria, right, it needs to fall within this purview in order for this main thesis to be addressed correctly. You're looking at what the solution will include, because we have a problem here. We have a problem that we have been presented with by our instructor or in the professional field by your superior. I need to find a solution. So what will that solution include? Well, it's going to likely come from the case studies that you're looking at. So while you're doing this, you can also spend the time generating alternative solutions and ideas, and just set them off to one side. Don't sort of agonize over them. Just have them there. It's a kind of what if, right? What if something else? Or you can call it a plan B. Whatever the metaphor, whatever the cliche you want to use, that's really kind of what you're doing. You're going to have a what if scenario if you collect alternate solutions and ideas to what you consider to be the main thesis that you are looking into. Measure alternatives against the criteria. Maybe some of them are worth pursuing. As you dig further, because alternate solutions and ideas, if they're presented quite early on, they may, over time, become more relevant. This could be an avenue that you had not considered in the beginning, but as you are doing the work, all of a sudden it does become more relevant. So when you've done all of that and you've collected all that data, that's when you begin to choose the best solution. You've considered alternates. You've now clearly studied and poured through the case studies and peer-reviewed articles and essays, and now you're going to try to find the best solution. And that's what you want to do. Now, as you are doing this, and this is all part of group thinking and group dynamics, there is something called groupthink. And this is an idea, or at least a dilemma that a group may face when others are afraid to kind of put up their hands and to dissent, right? To disagree. So if that's the case, even if the solution may not be the best, the group is almost afraid to consider the alternative. So it will tend to go, yeah, I think that's good. I think we should run with that. Now, when you are achieving consensus, make sure that it is truly consensus, and you've weighed the pros and cons, you've weighed the alternatives, you've chosen the best solution, but you've done it without falling into the trap of group thinking, where people are afraid to disagree. Excuse me. So if that's the case, you want to make sure that people are truly agreeing, truly achieving consensus. And so you need to look at it and say, well, how can I know, right? How can I know that I'm not falling into the trap of groupthink? If everyone is pleased with it, and it sounds like they have a vested interest in choosing solution A over B, if that is the case, you could continue looking for alternatives. You could say, you know what, right now, at the present time, we have another couple of weeks to go before this needs to be handed in. Let's put this one as in the A pile, but let's not give up our B pile either. Let's hold on to those alternate solutions and ideas just in case. And the members of the group begin writing and formulating and evaluating the work that is presented to them, the articles and case studies and so on that they really believe in, and they continue working. Well, eventually it may be that you are right all along, right? And what was in pile A, that best solution, was in fact the best one. So that is one of the ways around group thinking, because it could happen without you even knowing that that's what's going on. So if you can do that, and you're working with a group in a really positive, open, respectful kind of manner where you can resolve interpersonal conflicts and problems, people will feel comfortable being part of that group. And if you can do that, you can also work with each other's strengths. And those strengths could be of all kinds of things. You could have, members of different gender, class, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, physical ability, whatever it may be. Depending on the problem, the unique individuality of each person may be a positive thing that will help you to either decide the best solution or the opposite, to keep a completely open mind and realize that, you know what, there's a lot of different options. We now have, we have an absolute wealth of solutions. We need to pick the best one. So if if your group is made up or put together by truly different kinds of people coming from different parts of the world, different experiences, from different cultures, play to that strength. Because you may, coming, let's say, from North America, you may have a worldview that is quite different than someone from another part of the world. Open that, explore that, bring it to the table. Because if you are unaware that there even is a difference, you may miss something, right? You may shut out another person that may have something valuable and relevant to bring to the table because that person grew up in a different environment, in a different culture, in another part of the world. They may do things differently. So either way, play to the strengths of the group. Play to the differences of that group and celebrate those differences. And together, all the aspects, the dynamics of that group are made that much stronger because people feel that they are being celebrated for who they are, not for towing the line or falling into line with group thinking. No, you want the opposite. So this is another way to perhaps keep group thinking sort of at bay, is celebrate the differences that each person has that they bring to the table. So that if you have an ethnically diverse team, they may have really interesting ideas. They're bringing to the table their own lived reality. And that could be a really good thing. Because if you can do that, it's surprising what kind of ideas are going to be brought to the table. So you can ask yourself, all right, why would we have groups in the first place if we're working on things? I mean, surely one person can go out and do this work. Okay, so it turns out there's a reason why collaborative writing is actually sometimes the preferred way to do things for the following reasons. It could be one, that the task is simply too big for one person to do. Perhaps not one single person may have the knowledge that is required to do this task. It could be that the team is purposely put together with those differences so that they can reach a consensus that will be sort of more totalizing, more comprehensive, more perhaps macro than micro. And all those things really lend themselves in a positive way to collaborative writing. The differences of unique individuals brought together to work on one project is a good thing. If the task is too big or a single person cannot not have all that knowledge. Or it could be that the stakes are very high in that organization that you're working for, that it requires the most amount of good people all in the same room, all working together, because the task is that difficult. Okay, collaborative writing, which is what we're talking about, and this is typically what gets done in a group. You could have a couple of people working together. You could have a team of people that are working together, and there's a whole range of different ways to do it. You can meet in person, which is something we used to do, and hopefully soon it'll be that way. You can contact each other via email, personal messages, or, as I say, face-to-face meetings. It can be a democratically run group, or it can be a group with a leader. There's a whole range of different things. But if you have a leader, that leader needs to be able to delegate authority, again, in a respectful way, and say, okay, now we need to divide the responsibilities and the tasks evenly amongst all the people, and each of them, along with the writing process, may have a secondary task. So it is possible that one person, if they are really good at writing, may do the main amount of writing, but another person may do the editing. So the writing is done, the editing is done by a different person, and really it doesn't matter. Whatever the strengths of the group may be, some people are good at researching, others at drafting, others at designing, others at editing. Whatever the skills are that those individuals have, let those individuals do the tasks that they do best. Why not? It makes sense. So if you are doing that and you are in a position where you have to write collaboratively with another person or another group, make sure that you tap into those strengths so that you can achieve those goals and address the problem, create a main thesis, and then try to seek a solution to that problem. And if you can do it, that's when the group is really going to shine. So whatever the project is, you'll need a timeline. You'll need to delegate tasks to different people, again, either through a leader or individually. But no matter what, Everybody needs to know what to do and when. So when you're collaborating with people, right, you're making an analysis of a particular problem that is, in this case, given to you by the instructor. The audience will be someone that is simply interested in the material. Now, for myself, as the instructor of this course, I have a very strong interest. I have a vested interest as the audience to learn more about this particular issue that you are writing about. Now, I will not profess to be an expert in architecture, project management, or any of the other things that you're doing. All those things, I will ask that you bring those skills to the table when you're working on your project, but I will be the audience that is really eager to learn. So keep that in mind when you're writing it, and we'll talk about this in more detail as we move closer to the research project. So an analysis of the problem, an analysis of the audience. How much do they need to know? Is the audience a group of people that are well versed in this field? Do you have to explain, what an SOP is or KPIs or any of these kinds of things? If I know what they mean, then you can move on and just use KPI, right? That's key performance indicators. Yep, I got it. So depending on the audience, that will tell you to what degree you need to have detail in your report. If I know it thoroughly and implicitly, then you don't have to. But let's say someone who's simply interested, which would be me. How much do you need to stop and explain? You can explain via footnotes or endnotes. It's up to you. But you are dealing with the audience. Now, plan the organization, the formatting, the style of the document before anyone writes anything. What is it going to look like? How are different authors going to be blended together? Will each person write and then one person edits so that there seems to be kind of a single voice? It depends. It depends on how you want to do it. So there are always a lot of options. You want to make sure that you are aware of the deadline and that you are able to work within that deadline, because if there are scheduling problems, you want to make sure that you can account for them so that they don't become so dire and so serious that you have to hand in something that's only half finished, or worse, you might need for an extension. Okay, so you continue to work and you're composing and editing your text, and you want to make sure that you pay attention to the content. Is it relevant? Is it valuable? Does it show a degree of knowledge about the main thesis, the main problem, and especially the solution? How will that material be organized? Will it be from least important to most important, or the other way around? Will it be presented historically or chronologically? What style are you going to use? All those things really matter in the final presentation. Now, we're talking collaboratively here, but we will draw on these slides in the next few weeks as I start to talk more at length on the research report. Because whether you're doing it by yourself or within a group of 2 or 3 other people, the content, organization, and style still really matter. It may make it a little bit easier because it's all you, but if you're working in a collaborative situation, content, organization, and style is still really important. Okay, different people write in different ways. You may turn around and resolve that issue by having, let's say, 3 people write and only 1 person edit. So if you have 1 person editing, there could be perhaps a more uniform tone. Or if you edit your own work, you could go through it and together you could edit it, into a cohesive voice. You could have a single person. Let's say you might call them the head writer. Make any of the necessary changes so that writing style and tone is consistent. So you have one of two ways to do it. You can either bring it to the table and you all collectively edit it, or it is given to one person, and that one person is trusted with simply editing that material. And of course, when the report is done, that person is identified as the editor, right? They may not have done as much writing, but they've done just as much work in a different way. And of course, a team report needs to be carefully edited and proofread. Make sure that there is spelling consistencies, because, for example, depending on where you live, you may spell the word labor L-A-B-O-R or L-A-B-O-U-R. So whoever is writing, and it's a whole range of favor, flavor, labor, all those words need to be spelled out consistently. So depending on who the person is, you want to make sure that you all adopt the same model. Are we going to write English style, American style, whatever it is? So there is editing and proofreading consistency that is important. And one of the best ways to do it is to have perhaps, again, one person do that kind of editing. They're going to edit the material together, look for those consistencies, and make sure that mechanics and grammar and spelling is done correctly and consistently. Formatting, names, and whether you sign off on a particular section of the report, if you're working collaboratively. If you're not, and you're handing something out on your own, clearly your name on the front page is all we need. Also, run the spell check. But remember, the spell check that you're likely using will be the American spelling, where LABOR is the spelling for labor. Whatever you do, make sure that it's consistent. Okay, so individuals that are going to be editing the work, if there is a person designed or going to be asked to do that, make sure that they don't edit your material so dramatically and so drastically that it really it warps your idea. It sort of fundamentally changes the expression of your idea. So if that's the case, the editor needs to be somewhat of a diplomat to say, okay, I know what you're saying here, but can you agree with me that perhaps this is the better way to say it? And that editor has to be willing to be open and respectful so that the writer of the text that someone else is editing is going to agree with them. So you don't want to call the writer's abilities into question, but certainly there could be, from the editor's point of view, a better way to say something. So again, it is a collaborative effort between the editor and the writer of that one specific piece. So you want to make sure that those problems are overcome, and again, in a respectful and open and honest way. Certain words, depending on what the nature of the problem and the main thesis is, words like could and should, typically, or might, these are called conditional verbs. And conditional verbs are just that. On condition that the following is met, we could or should or might see the following. This is when you are positing a hypothesis, a possibility, a potential. That's when you would use would, could, and should, and words like that, because it's not a hard fact. It's not a provable, verifiable scientific fact. It's a tendency, a possibility, a likelihood. When that is the situation, the editor will say, let's change this from can to could, or, will to might. Those words soften slightly what's happening, and it is important to be able to do it. So how does the editor do this? Well, they take the time to build trust and loyalty. And if you have that, if you believe in that editor, then you will write to the best of your abilities. And that editor will be very thankful because, well, first of all, you've kind of made their job a lot easier, first of all. But if you know that you own that piece of work and you still have final say, because that's one of the ways around any issues with an editor. The editor will finish it, but they hand it back to you. And you can look at it and say, yeah, I'm really pleased with what you did. I really like how you reshaped my idea a little bit here. And it's respectful. Now, both the editor and the original writer look great, right? You've now played to the strengths of now 2 out of, let's say, 4 people in the group. So that's one. Be a responsible team member, right? Carry out your responsibilities to the best of your abilities, whether it's researching, compiling, summarizing, editing, whatever it is, just do the job in the best way you can. Remember, too, that if it is kind of a multicultural or multi-language group, that people see things differently, they experience reality differently, and therefore express themselves differently. Be mindful of that so that the editor shouldn't steamroll over those differences. Perhaps is the way to kind of navigate around it and kind of highlight that difference a little bit so that the writer is still pleased with the particular way that they saw something. And that's really when the editor is especially good. They still keep the flavor, right? The flavor of the writer's work and their perspective, their worldview, without at the same time flattening everything into a kind of sameness. So there is a bit of a balance between the editor finding the best way to express something and at the same time allowing the writer to express their worldview, right? Their uniqueness. So not always easy, but certainly be aware that people see the world differently and express that difference using a different kind of vocabulary. Remember finally that writing is sort of more structured grammatically, stylistically, and so on than simply talking. And you want to make sure that you are aware that people, speak one way but write another, and make sure that the team actually is agreeing with you when in fact they may not. Be aware that when people speak to you, they're doing it honestly. So, because talking is looser than writer, people on the team think they can agree when they don't. Well, let's be clear. When the editor says something, they ask you a question, answer it honestly, respectfully, and together you and the editor can work collaboratively so that both of you shine, both of you look good, and both of you have done your respective jobs to the best of your abilities. Okay, so that's pretty well it. I will be back shortly with another video, and we will see you very soon.